Hello, everybody. Welcome to the panel for Beyond the Hero's Journey. I would like to start with a few things first before I introduce our panelists. I'm Matu J. Steger. I go by he, they pronouns, used preferably interchangeably, and I am a Kidlit author, and I'm going to be moderating today's panel for you guys. Diana would like me to start with just a few bits of information. This event is sponsored by Renaissance Press, a Canadian publisher dedicated to publishing, supporting, and uplifting marginalized authors. Thanks to their generosity, we've been able to include live captions with this panel. You can find a link to the Renaissance in the chat. The land acknowledgement we're going to start with today is going to be about specifically for the Americas, just so that's very clear if you're an international viewer. I'm going to acknowledge the fact that we live on traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of many different nations, especially since, for myself included, we're kind of all over the Americas, and specifically for weekend writers, it is Musqueam, Tislium, Watuth, and Saquesh First Nations, which we are learning and working and organizing today. I think it's important to acknowledge the land because growing up, I am only half an immigrant. I'm biracial. I'm actually Anishinaabe, but a lot of people have never heard the traditional names of the territories that they live on for the indigenous people and speak of them in past tense quite often as if we Native Americans are no longer in existence. I'm gonna stop there because go ahead and start introducing our panelists. If we could go one by one, let's start with you, Joe. Just give me your name, your pronouns, and why you wanted to speak on the panel today.
Hi, my name is Joe. Pronouns are they, them. And I was interested in this topic because I think about story structure a lot, and I also read a lot and noticed a lot of, so like the hero's journey specifically seems air quotes fundamental to fantasy, but with a lot of cross-genre things happening in the industry. And I don't just mean like space fantasy, I mean like fantasy romance, fantasy mystery, science fiction mystery. It's kind of important to both acknowledge established structures, but then also think about like what new horizons there are. And it's a fun thing to just play around with also as a story crafter.
Okay, cool. Jade, would you like to go next, please?
Sure. My name is Jade. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a writer and an editor. My particular interest is in story structure and genre patterns, especially within science fiction and fantasy. And that's why I wanted to speak on this panel.
Jasmine?
Yeah, I'm Jasmine Gower. I am pronoun indifferent, so they, she, he, or neopronouns are all fine. And I am a fantasy author, so I'm very interested in kind of the history of the fantasy genre and the hero's journey's place in that, but also in how the genre can expand and grow and also tap into literary traditions that predate what we now recognize as the modern fantasy genre.
And I'm assuming that it's pronounced Jimmy.
Right, Jimmy, like Hendrix, that's actually what it's named after. So I'm Jimmy Rodriguez. I write young adult fantasy novels for now. I use he and him pronouns. And the reason why I wanted to be on this panel is because I do like classical fantasy, but as the genre has grown, I've been very interested in how it's grown. And of course, I want to find my own footing in it and be able to, you know, have my own perspective on it and really be thoughtful about it. So I'm interested to share my ideas and hear what everybody has to say about it.
Very cool. I'm so glad to have all you guys here today. And I made this joke before, but my white name is Jonas, so technically we're all Jays. But I just found that very funny. So before we get started, I'm going to just lay out the fact that the hero's journey actually crosses all genres. We may hear a lot about fantasy today because that does have like a crux of where the hero's journey actually really is saddled, because it comes from, you know, old school mythologies and stuff like that. But so as I ask questions, I want to kind of go in a rotation, or I'm going to go in the same rotation that we introduced all of you guys in, so that everybody gets their turn to speak and we get to hear as, you know, many interesting thoughts on it as possible. If you don't have a particular answer for that question, feel free to just say pass. Okay, so the first question is, what are the storytelling limitations of the hero's journey, and why might someone want to move beyond that? Joe? Joe, you're on mute.
Thank you. Yeah, just didn't want you hearing my AC buzzing when I'm not talking. So yeah, the thing with the hero's journey is it follows like very specific plot beats in an almost analogous way to how a story can only be considered a capital R romance if it hits specific story structures. And so the thing that I found limiting with the hero's journey is that you need a character who can fit into the story, not so much a story built around a character, where that whole idea of plot-driven versus character-driven really comes in. And I think especially, I know this is true for myself, I'm not going to speak for everyone, obviously, but when I was starting out in fantasy, it's like you want to fit all your stories and characters into this structure, and sometimes it falls flat because it seems that the characters are doing things to fulfill to fulfill those plot beats, like the whole call to adventure, refusing it, oh no, the mentor dies, and all of that. But stories become more interesting when you can do what you want to do with it, not necessarily following, for lack of a better word, a recipe for what a fantasy story is.
I definitely agree. Fantasy is one of those things that you're definitely allowed to stretch your wings with, which is what I love about it. Jade?
Along with what Joe was saying about how not trying to fit the character to the journey, especially if you have more than one character, if you have 2 points of view, if you're trying to just do the same hero's journey with both of them, it can feel formulaic even when you're writing it. So finding different ways to structure it can break that up and make it more interesting, even just to write.
Jasmine?
Yeah, I definitely agree with what Joe and Jay said. I also find personally that the hero's journey really kind of is structured in a way that it's only designed to tell the story of certain types of heroes. And I find, as you know, as a disabled person and a queer person, a lot of times the stories that are important or relatable to people like me don't fit into that pre-structured formula. And we really get left out of a lot of stories. And I'm sure there are a lot of other marginalized groups that are similarly excluded from this very set kind of narrative. So there's definitely a lot of space in breaking away from the hero's journey structure to really give those kind of stories more voice.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with giving marginalized voices more voice just in general. Jimmy?
I'm going to build right off of what Jasmine said about whether or not there's room for everybody in that very prototypical hero's journey. You know, the audience that I write for, I'm a teacher. I teach middle school, and a lot of my boys in particular don't like to read, and a lot of times they'll just tell me flat out, I don't see myself in any of these stories, and they don't necessarily mean they don't see their skin color. A lot of times their life that they're living is not just sort of a ho-hum life until they're the chosen one. I don't think they're really waiting to be chosen by some magical power. There's a lot of work that goes into getting out of poverty, which is my life experience. So I wanted to write a story that wasn't so much about being chosen for some great thing and having help along the way and having this very bland, you know, vanilla type story. So a lot of it is about growth, and a lot of it is about setbacks, and a lot of it is about how to handle adversity. And that's one of the biggest things I think all of us educators have to do, is not just teach kids our content, but teach them how to handle adversity in general and how to be successful anyway. So when I look at the hero's journey, there definitely is adversity, but it doesn't show itself in the way that I think kids like me who grew up poor, who grew up in the inner city, really experience it. So trying to tap into my own experiences and still be thoughtful and purposeful about the structure is what led me to get a little bit more away from the hero's journey, even though of course all of us studied it, all of us have read, in that genre, we all watch movies that are based on that. So I think there's still some good you can extract from, but there's also some limitations that we can fill in with our own experiences and backgrounds, regardless of how diverse we may seem on the surface.
I really like that, Jimmy. Not a lot of people bring up poverty, and I grew up in poverty, and I still live in poverty. And I think that people don't understand just how hard of a situation it is, regardless of your status. A lot of times poverty can be one of the biggest things that holds you back for your entire life. And I do think that letting kids see that it is okay to be poor, essentially, is a really big thing. You don't have to be the farmer hero who becomes a Jedi. Yeah, I like that. Our second question is, how is the focus on the hero's journey in modern media problematic for marginalized creators, which just absolutely bumps off of everything we've been saying. So go ahead, Joe.
So I think it's problematic in some ways because it's air quotes easy, where I think the most apparent in a lot of movies that get big, where, like, not to call out specific property, but like Star Wars is a very classic hero's journey structure. It has very particular beats, you have to like spend a certain number of like the minutes that it takes to tell that story visually. And similar to what, going off of what Jasmine and Jimmy said, because it has to follow those beats, this type of everyman protagonist that isn't an everyman in any sense of the word, there's not a lot of room for introducing very real life limitations, because, like, going back to your farm kid, like, some people grew up in a city, some people don't have the access to like a mentor who can teach them the ropes of being the chosen one, and some kids don't want to be a chosen one, and that's cool too. So I think that's why like the problematic element of it, I think, is more of an emergent property than something that's built into the structure of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. I can agree with you there, Jade.
When I first started studying story structure, like, I really liked the hero's journey because it gave me a pattern to sort of deconstruct mainly movies and stuff, and just get an idea of how I wanted to write a story, how the flow of a story went. But what I didn't see in it was kind of my experience. So again, like Joe was saying, I don't have a mentor type thing, not a farm kid, and some of those points, led me to media like Buffy, where it's more female led. And one of the things I found when I was looking at that was it led me into the heroine's journey, which was Kate Hudson's sort of rebut to the hero's journey. In there, she kind of goes through the fact that people with female socialization experience a different world. And she laid out different points for a heroine's journey. I'm not sure that fully encompasses maybe everyone's experience, especially trans people I can think of in particular, but it does kind of give a second structure with similar points, but a different internal perspective on those points.
I really like that you mentioned that. As a trans person, a trans mask person who has physically gone through transition through hormones and stuff like that, one of the things that I always attached to was vampires and werewolves growing up. And like, that feels very obvious for obvious reasons, but like Kate Beckinsale in Underworld. That was my idol growing up. I was like, yes, that's who I want to be. And
Amazing.
yeah, so I like that you bring that point up. Jasmine?
Yeah, I like that you brought up the heroine's journey too, Jade, because in thinking of deviations from the hero's journey that I've encountered before that I really enjoy, one kind of character arc that I really like is a sort of negative character development, I guess, for lack of a better word, a character who starts out more traditionally heroic, who throughout the course of the journey encounters obstacles and traumas and enemies that really kind of it causes them to react in sort of a trauma way where they lose those heroic characteristics and become not a worse person, but just messier, I guess. And the times that I've seen that implemented, the characters who undergo those character arcs are almost always women, or specifically women of color or queer women. And I feel very seen with that kind of thing as someone who is mentally ill, who has, because of my gender and my disabilities, etc., has experienced gaslighting and things like that. And feeling like a person who starts out with good intentions in some scenarios, but because of the situation I'm in, gets really kind of stressed out and angrier and not as clearly, the shining example of a hero in that particular situation, just because the whole thing is kind of, I feel, pitted against. And that's the kind of character arc that I don't feel like the hero's journey has room for, but it's one that I think really relates to people of marginalized genders and mentally ill people. And again, other marginalized groups that I can't speak for, but I imagine they might see similar experiences in that. And the emphasis on the hero's journey, all of the Disney and Pixar movies having to go through the hero's journey, like by contract, I don't know if it's necessarily they're contractually obligated, but I know that pretty much all of them do it. That doesn't leave room for those kind of stories, and for people like me to see ourselves in those narratives.
I really, really like that you bring up the corruption arc, and I want to follow up on that for you, Jasmine. What do you think of Harley Quinn?
Harley Quinn?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that one's a little more, because she's, traditionally considered a villain, but
Right.
or
she becomes a hero later on, though.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I guess comics, it's a little hard to which continuity are you talking about? But
yeah, well, she kind of travels from the, just trying to help people, doctor,
right,
into, going criminally insane, into, falling in love with Poison Ivy, and then becoming kind of the anti-hero and very anti-capitalist, what, society sees as the bad guy, but in actuality, they're trying to help.
And that's exactly the kind of thing that the kind of narrative that I can look at and be like, yeah, that makes sense to me. This is someone who started out wanting to help people, doing a lot of hard work to help people, and then because she crossed paths with someone who decided to abuse her, it really kind of derailed her whole mission there, and it set her off on a different course. But that's something that happens to people, and people deserve the space to see a character dealing with those kind of issues and maybe coming back, or maybe just kind of settling somewhere not quite villainous, but not exactly the hero that they started out as either.
Yeah, I think that's what I definitely love about that typical type narrative. And I really like that you brought that up, because I think it's important for people to hear about that you can go from good, bad, good. And your morals change depending on how you see the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Jimmy, it's your turn. If you'd like me to repeat the question, I can.
Yeah, I mean, Jasmine is just like lobbing them up for me. I appreciate that. I mean, I think in my experience, when you look at what a hero is, sometimes I think the scope is lost. Like, the hero's journey is set up for this really grand epic tale, and sometimes for kids especially, or teenagers, it's not about saving the world all the time. Like, for me growing up, I just wanted to help my mother and help my little brothers, right? I wanted to get us out of poverty and move us into a better place. And so when I wrote my story and I look at JT as a character and I think about what happens to him if he doesn't have my mother, right? His mother has early onset Alzheimer's. So what happens when your mentor is a kid 1 year older than you who doesn't really know much more than you, right? Like what happens in the absence of those things? Because for a lot of my students, once they leave my classroom, that might be the last time that day where they see, you know, somebody that they look up to and that they can trust, right? And I only get them for 45 minutes. So then what? And then all bets are off and they're all kind of, it's like the, you know, they're leading each other. And so the structure for the hero's journey just depends a lot on people having that same standard experience, right? And then those of us who have a different experience don't always have the power or the influence to get those stories told, right? We don't work for Disney all the time, so we can't get our movies made, or we don't have connections in Hollywood. So when you're telling a story, it's important to structure it in a way that you feel people can relate to, even if it's just you or even if it's people who are like you, because especially if you haven't had that typical experience, which it sounds like a lot of us haven't anyway, right? So I feel a lot of pressure sometimes to represent a big group of people who don't always write books, right? I mean, if you could go back in time and go back to my neighborhood and follow the progression of kids that I went to school with and see how many of them ended up publishing books, that number is very, very small. And I don't think it's for lack of talent at all. So seeing themselves not just in me, but in my story was a very important thing for me. So the hero's journey is not my journey. So though but people do see me as a hero, right? My mom and my brothers and people around me would say, yeah, that's the guy. He's the one that got us out of there. But there was so much that went into that, right? I mean, there was so much that went into getting a scholarship and going to college. And I think a lot of times from the outside looking in, it does look easy. And the hero's journey sometimes does make it feel like lucky or magical. And so when you write fantasy, like I do, you have to balance that amount of magic and luck with just real hard work and setback. And there's some lessons in there that you have to teach that the hero's journey doesn't always allow. So I saw a question kind of relating to it, but I'll let you get to that. But yeah, Jasmine, I think you did a great job. And I can't speak for every experience either. And that you and I kind of have been going back and forth and showing that we really all need each other to tell those stories because one of us can't do it alone.
Yeah, that's a great point. And that's what I love about the fact that there are so many authors and a plethora of different experiences. And I do like that Big Five seems to be picking up more and more marginalized creators, so very slowly. I want to just remind you, Jimmy, that you are a hero to your kids at school. I'm sure tons of them see you that way. When I was growing up, I was really abused, and my history teacher was everything to me. So teachers mean a lot to kids, more than I think that we might see on the surface as adults. For our next question is, what are some alternative story structures that people can use outside of the hero's journey? Joe, go ahead.
So yeah, like I mentioned in my introduction, I think what we're seeing a lot, not a lot, but it's definitely emerging, are a lot more SFF genre mashups. And I think it's a thought that's lived rent-free in my head ever since I went to a panel that was about romance specifically as structure with science fiction fantasy as set dressing. And because there are, like, similar to romance, like a mystery has specific requirements in order to be considered a mystery that I think are a lot of fun a lot of fun ideas to play around with, because it's like Gideon the Ninth blew up last year, and that book is a locked house murder mystery, like, and that has, necromancers, magic, and skeletons, and that's definitely not a hero's journey. So I think what's helpful is to, not just for story structure, but more generally read outside of your chosen written genre to see what else is going on. But also, I think one thing that kind of gets left out in a lot of these craft conversations is to also just sit down and look at the thing you made. Because at least when I'm drafting, I don't know what the story structure is going in. But it's like at that first revision stage where I'm like, okay, so I did this, this, and this. Okay. And then figuring out like what needs to be done to either set it to something that can be defined in a metaphorical three dimensions, or if the story is doing what it needs to do without something as rigid as, say, like hero's journey, mystery, romance.
Yeah, I like that you bring up Gideon. My partner's reading Gideon right now and absolutely adoring it. Jade, go ahead.
So while I've been looking at structure, one of the things that I noticed was for Hero's Journey, a lot of times we end up focusing on a specific type of character. Like they're usually young and they're usually like they need a mentor. They're trying to go somewhere, do something, save the world. And I found when I was trying to find a different structure, because when I'm writing something with multiple points of view and I wanted to have them all sort of progressing concurrently without them being boring and all doing the same thing. And where I found the division line was actually in the types of characters that I was using. So I kind of made a distinct choice to use one young character, but when I was looking at an older character and looking at sort of the archetype of an elder, what is their story? They're not trying to save the world at that point. I found an interesting blog that kind of went through the archetypal character arcs, and they list them as maiden, hero, queen, king, crone, and mage. And like there's different things that you're trying to accomplish. So yeah, in the hero arc, you're trying to save the world and do whatever, but in a king arc, you're trying to surrender power. And that has a very different story, and it kind of lends itself to a different structure. Like maybe there's more flashbacks to things that led up to why they need to release this power, or who should get it or who shouldn't get it. Things that you wouldn't be considering if your character is always the same young person who needs mentoring or whatever.
That's like, I love that. That's such a good thing. There's like a lot of people hear the hero's journey and we immediately think young adult. And it's not just for the young adult, it's like primarily from adult fantasy. Frodo and honestly, Samwise have similar hero's journey that experience. So I think that it's important to remind people that the hero's journey isn't just about some young white boy who gets picked up by an old Jedi and carried off to new and different lands. Go ahead, Jasmine.
Yeah, so one thing, I think Jade touched on this a little bit earlier, but one thing about the hero's journey that I find very limiting is that it's very individualistic. And while I'm a very individualistic person personality-wise, like I'm horrible at asking for help and delegating my needs to the people in my life who want to support me. Ideologically, I like stories more that are about communities and societies and people existing as a part of a whole, and not just the hero who has to do these things, and he'll have helpers along the way, but not really, the story's not about them, it's about the one hero. So I really like, I know this is not everyone's cup of tea, but I really love ensemble casts in fiction. So that is one of those types of stories that is really difficult to fit into the hero's journey without it becoming just like a huge, a cement block of a book, trying to give every single character in the cast their own distinct hero's journey. That doesn't work super well. It's, I think, more fun to write about them as a collective, to write and read about them as a collective. So that's one alternative to the hero's journey that I really enjoy, and I would like to see a lot more of that in fiction.
And of course, the Shadow and Bone TV series just went live, and of course my first thought was Six of Crows because I'm obsessed with Kaz Brecker. It was just the first time I ever saw a disabled person who was like me in fiction, and I maybe cried a lot in that book, but it's fine. But yeah, ensemble casts are so fun, and I think that if it's done really well, you get such a really good, rich story from it. Jimmy?
Yeah, I think in terms of an alternate, story structure, Joe kind of mentioned what I was going to say, which is sometimes you just have to look at the story you're trying to tell. I think that when you're first starting out and you study story structures and you see what other people have done, I mean, if it's successful, it's potentially successful for a reason. So you want to learn from it. But ultimately, I just wanted to tell JT's story at first. I wanted to tell this story about this kid, and I told it orally before I ever wrote it. I used to tell it to my students to get them to finish their work. All right, if everybody finishes and does well, then I'll tell you the next part of the story before the bell while I'm making up this story. And then I needed a structure to serve me, because at the time I was just an amateur and I didn't know anything about writing something that was worth publishing, right? Or writing something that was going to be worth people's hard-earned money. So then it was time to go back and structure it in a way that served what the point I was trying to make with my story. So I think a lot of times if you get caught up on trying to make a story that fits a certain structure, you're doing yourself a disservice, because we're storytellers first and foremost. I mean, storytelling is just at the heart of, culture. So for me, and trying to preserve some of my culture, a lot of it is talking with my grandfather. He had Alzheimer's as well, and I was just a little boy, but trying to remember how he was trying to convey experiences to me was important when I was thinking about my own journey as a writer. And yeah, like Joe said, once I move on to a different genre, then there's some different conventions that go into writing various genres. But at the heart of it all, you're just trying to tell a story. You're trying to evoke some emotion, or you're just trying to teach some level of morality, depending on who your audience is. And I think the structure probably at times could go second. Not every time. I mean, there's definitely stories that are supposed to fit a structure, and that's great. But for me, I think for my style, and maybe for a lot of your styles, maybe some of you who are listening can relate to it. If you just focus on telling a story, and then in the editing and revision process, go back and look and say, okay, maybe not like 8 straight chapters of, this, particular event or whatever. Maybe I need to break that up a little bit. Then you can play with structure a little bit more and let it serve you versus the other way around.
Yeah, I like that. I want to bring up that, like, there are so many different types of structures that you can use for writing. But structure itself is actually a very Western society thing in literature. The way that we do the hero's journey and the 3-act, the quest, all of those things, they come directly from Western societies, and like Greece and the Cypriot Isles and stuff like that, Cyprus Isles. And I want to mention just that other cultures have different ways of storytelling, as Jimmy said. In my particular culture, some of our stories don't really have like a beginning, middle, end, and they're just like very particular in the way that they're told. Like there's one story that is very, very long. It's about like the hero of the Anishinaabe, Buju, and there's a part of his story where his best friend is eaten by a giant dragon water panther, and he's like, I'll get revenge on you, and then he goes and eats dinner and goes home. That's it. That's the end of the story. And that's what I think of when I think of like non-white storytelling, is sometimes you don't get the ending you want. But I'm gonna go over some questions that have been asked by in our chat here by our audience. And then if we have time, I'll get to some other questions, but I want to get to these first. So the first one is, Amanda asks, is the heroine's journey the same as the book by Maureen Murdoch? And Jade, that's probably directly to you.
It's not. It's a different one. This one's the heroine's journey. It's actually The Virgin's Promise, Kate Hudson. So it's a different book, but it hits she's basically mimicking the hero's journey, but with a female-oriented aspect to it.
And then our next question is, do you all have any recs for books on different non-hero journey story structures? I think that there's probably a ton. Do you guys have any specifics that you like?
I have one. It's called Damn Fine Story. I'll type it into the chat. Damn Fine Story by Chuck Wendig. It's all about the perspective of how to tell an engaging story because through the perspective of his dad, not a writer, not a novelist, but told really funny, engaging stories. But if you had to ask him to parse it out into anything we would understand from the lens of like studying craft and structure, he'd be like, I don't know. So yeah, a big thesis of that one is about how stories are characters and their problems. And that was really eye-opening for me when trying to follow a structure was kind of breaking what I was trying to do, if I can be so bold. Yeah, that's a good one. And it's also, I found, very non-prescriptive. So if you don't want people telling you what to do and how to tell stories, it's also great for that.
I'll suggest a book that is not technically about structure, but it's going to be about breaking down your mindset on what structure is and everything. And it is Craft in the Real World by Matthew Salialis. I cannot say his last name, I'm sorry. But it is actually more about how to workshop fiction and how to like better understand fiction from a non-Western point of view. I believe Matthew focuses more on East Asian culture in the book. And if you are looking for a different perspective, that's a really good place to start. If anybody else has any other recommendations, or we're just going to throw Amazon at them and a Google search.
Well, there's one blog called Helping Writers Become Authors by, I think it's K.M. Weiland. Yeah, yes. K.M. Weiland. And she goes through archetypal character arcs, so flat characters, and also the shadow archetypes. So I remember Joe was talking about having sort of a negative character arc. This would kind of help people who are looking at that to sort of decide how to negatively arc a specific character if they wish to do that. And I can post that in the Discord.
It's a great idea. Also, K.M. Weiland has a bunch of movies broken down by the way that their structure is done, and it is so helpful to be like watching a movie and reading. Oh my gosh, you learn so much that way. Okay, so let's go on to the next question. Miranda asks, I'm curious if any of you use other structures, if you tweak the hero's journey to serve your own purposes, or do you throw off the yoke of structure completely? I think we've kind of covered this, but if you have any more points, go ahead.
I'm good. Oh, great. Okay. I'm going back to those notes I was trying to find earlier because I learned a lot, especially with things having locked down. There was a plethora of different writing events, and one of them was with author Nino Cipri, all about writing horror. And as strange as that sounds, it does. What they went on to talk about was just story shapes more generally.
Oh no, I think she hit her mute button.
Yeah, Joe, you hit mute.
Great. So at least how it's taught in like high school English and whatnot. You know, there's your initial event, the rising action, the climax, the falling action. And one of the things that they talked about was in horror, you literally flip that upside down where it's kind of a dark descent into madness. And also this opportunity is a little pricey, but I did attend a revision season with Alana K. Arnold where we talked about story. There was an entire unit on story structure, and one of the things was the big focus of that was what makes stories satisfying to you specifically as both a writer and a reader. And one of the things she brought up is the almost circular nature of some stories where you don't the characters don't have to they can end up in a similar place, but the story circle does close at some point. And again, it's all about your personal satisfaction. I hope that answers the question.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I'll touch on it a little bit because I thought Jill brought up a great point about having different perspectives. And I found that in my first couple of books, when I was telling the story, most of the story was about JT. And so he was getting about 80-90% of the chapters. The antagonist of that story spent a lot of time away from him, on totally different continent. I was trying to tell his story as well. And then as I go to the third and fourth book, now it's a bit more balanced between two protagonists and an antagonist. And I found that the original story structure that I had is just useless to me, basically. So now it's got to be a little bit more nuanced in terms of how I can get these two people not to feel like watered down versions of what JT was doing, while also making sure that the antagonist doesn't feel like a watered down version of the previous antagonist. So in terms of story structure now, a lot of it happened in the outlining, a lot of it happened in the planning and working. My editor she's such a great person. She was even offered to help me in the outlining stages before I gave her something to have to totally fix. Like, we talked back and forth about it for quite a bit. How much do we balance this perspective and that perspective? And, what am I going to lose or gain by telling the story from this person's point of view or this person's point of view? So I think a lot of it is just trying to remember to be intentional about it. So for me, and what I'm doing right now, is there a story structure that currently could have helped me with that? I don't know. If you guys have one, that'd be great. But for me, a lot of it is trying to figure out how I can get a structure to serve what it is I'm trying to accomplish here. Because it's almost like a huge break in the series, right? It's a big risk to take, not having the same main character for the second half of a series. So, and I'm looking forward to the How to Plot a Series event later. There's a plug for that for you, Diana. But it really is a challenge sometimes whenever you're trying to be coherent, because a lot of times what's in your head as a fantasy author, you're trying to play this game of not giving too much information without confusing everybody. So you've got not just story structure, but of course world building and character development, and all these things go into the mix. So for me, I think you want to make sure that you find you want to make sure you find a structure that's going to fit how many perspectives you have, whether that's the ensemble cast or just a specific individual, or maybe two conflicting points of views. So definitely spend a little bit more time thinking about that before you get so far in a draft and realize that the structure, didn't serve your purpose because it was one of the few maybe that you knew.
Yeah, I really like that. And I want to just kind of add, for anybody listening in, if you're breaking away from the traditional structures and stuff, and you're seeking traditional publishing and you don't have an agent yet, you can still get an agent without traditional structure. I got my agent with a book that has no acts. It's just one fat roller coaster. And we worked on building up pacing and everything. And we've gotten really good responses from editors so far. A few passes, but mostly they're all still just reading. You can get an agent with a non-Western structure and plotline, or non-structured book. Don't let that be the thing that makes you fear into writing to something that is not comfortable. If anybody else has anything to say on that question, go ahead. If not, I'll move on to the next.
I can speak on this one a bit. Kind of jumping off what you were just saying, Matu. And going back to what Joe and Jimmy have both mentioned in terms of writing the story that you want to tell and not necessarily thinking about structure. I was, of course, raised in the US, so I still have, the very Western education concepts of beginning, middle, end. So I think that's all kind of in the back of my head when I write. And that's pretty inevitable for me to incorporate that into my stories unless I'm actively trying not to. But other than that, I don't really actively think about structure when I'm sitting down and writing a book for the first draft. I just kind of tell the story that makes sense to me in my head. And when I go back in editing, then I pay attention to things like pacing and plot beats and organization and things like that affect the structure. But for the most part, I don't really think about the hero's journey as I'm writing. I'm familiar with it as a literary analysis tool, but not as much as a craft tool. I don't pay that much attention to it. So while I might have some stories that do actually fit that mold, it's not intentional. It's just what that story happened to need when I was writing it. So for anyone who's feeling really intimidated by all this talk of structure and the hero's journey specifically, it's you don't have to pay attention to those kinds of things when you actually sit down and write it. That's something that can wait until you've had some time to put some distance between it and then put on your, you know, your reader glasses as you go back and edit it.
And
Yeah. Go ahead, sorry, Joe.
no worries. And to iterate something that I think Jasmine hinted at, finish that draft before you do any thinking
Oh,
about
yeah.
story structure.
Oh yeah.
Just want to explicitly put that out there.
Yeah, that stuff's a lot easier to handle once you have the basics of what you want the book to be already written down.
Yeah, not to be a broken record, but you cannot edit a blank page.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next question is kind of a doozy. I'm not really sure if any of us are qualified to answer it, but let's do the best we can. So Amanda says, from what I've learned, a lot of, maybe most, narrative structures are dependent on cultural geographic boundaries. My question is, if you use, say, a West African narrative structure, how do you avoid issues of appropriation? I know there has been some issues with writers borrowing Scandinavian structures, so it seems a little tricky line to walk. Any suggestions for doing this without being offensive?
I think kind of step one is the humility of acknowledging what you're doing. So like if you are borrowing, so like if you want to borrow, say, a West African story structure, make sure you've read content or support authors from that background first and foremost. But then also don't make it sound like you've invented it. I think is kind of step one, because like there are cultural perspectives certainly to a lot of this story structure, but we don't want to, I think it's the tricky line of we want to open up the boundaries of what a story can be, but then not accidentally going back into the same or a different box because suddenly we're afraid of such issues. And I think usually where you run to, at least from what I've seen of authors running into cultural appropriation, it's been a lot of, again, that arrogance of, oh, I invented this. This is from my brilliant mind, when more often than not, there is someone of a marginalized or underrepresented background who has done it before. So just keeping your eyes and ears open to things that are in the vein of what you want to try to do is what I recommend.
I think that's a pretty deep thing. I mean, if somebody asked me about, you know, which culture my story structure came from, I'd be a little bit put back at first, because like Jasmine said, sometimes I'm just telling the story that I'm telling. So if someone found some parallels between what I wrote and Scandinavian culture, which I'm not Scandinavian, you know, I'd want to learn more. That'd be the first thing, and see, you know, maybe if there was something that I had read or watched that kind of influenced my, you know, my writing in that way. And I just put myself in a position of learning. Anytime that you're gonna, you know, do things that are outside your comfort zone, whether it's cultural or not, you're gonna have to be a learner. So humility definitely plays a big role in that. I don't know that I would sweat about it too much. If I enjoyed, you know, West African storytelling and I thought that it would suit what it is I was writing, I'd worry about that much less than whether or not I was trying to write the West African experience, because I'm also not West African, right? And because that would be my bigger concern if I was trying to write a story that wasn't my place to tell. I don't know that I would worry about it at the structural level, because almost nobody really, I mean, unless you're advertising it, right? Like this is some modern fantasy based on West African storytelling. At that point, that is maybe when you want to, you know, step back and do a little bit more research and ask yourself why you were going that route. But just in terms of planning and outlining and, you know, where you're getting the story structure from, I don't know that I would concern myself too much with that.
I'm going to make a last point, just personally, as somebody who is biracial, Anishinaabe and European. My mom is Scandinavian, Scottish, and like a mixture of a bunch of other stuff. But I personally don't think you should actively go and use somebody else's structure. If you're like, I'm just going to use a West African structure today, like it feels like you're like, I'm going to try and seek to be outside of the box of the white narrative, and just, you're going to pee in a lot of Wheaties, to say the least. People are not going to enjoy that. You know, I'm not a big supporter of people writing like I'm never gonna write a POV like main character of a Black person because that is not my experience. That's not my place. Um, but also because I'm gonna bring a different lens to the story. I am going to bring a, you know, biracial experience to the story, a westernized experience to the story, and it is not going to be the same. Some off the top of my head, which is Steeped in Gold, is getting a lot of flack right now for being a Jamaican inspired story written by a Black American, and it coming off as a fetishization of Jamaica. And these are things that we need to be very, very careful of as writers, that some things just aren't in our lane. And it's okay to acknowledge that. It's okay to say, you know, I have a different lens experience. Just because my character happens to be white or biracial or Hispanic or Latinx or whatever, it doesn't mean just they're going to be exactly like this other character who's exactly like that. It's coming from your lens, your experience as a human being. And everybody has a different experience. Every single one of us has a different experience. I am so grateful that you guys are here and we have had such a wonderful discussion. And I am just really pleased with everything that we've talked about today. We have done a lot of groundwork that I think is going to be incredibly helpful for so many writers. And, you know, before we go, how about we go ahead and go over same rotation as before, and everybody can say, hey, this is where you can find me online. I would like to again thank Renaissance for sponsoring us. Yay, thank you, Renaissance. But go ahead, Joe, and start us off with where we can find you online.
So yeah, this was great. Thank you for the thoughtful questions, Walter. So you can find me online at Joe Eats Food on Twitter or Instagram, but you can read my thoughts on books that I read at joewritesfantasy.me. And that's it for that.
Jade?
I am still currently getting my website up and running, but if anyone wants to work with me, they can find me at eclipsewordsmithing@gmail.com. And I do editing, proofreading, and some transcription work.
Jasmine?
Yeah, you can find me on my author website is jasminegower.com. My editing website is publishing.jasminegower.com. I also recently just joined Readsy, so you can find my profile there if you're looking for some editorial services. And I'm on Twitter at JAS_Gower.
Jimmy?
Yeah, if you want to, actually talk with me about writing, I think the best place to find me is on Twitter at Jimmy A. Rodriguez. And in the Discord, where I'll be afterwards, that's where I have all the links to all my other work, my nonprofit work, and my author website and things like that. They're all really long, so it'll be a little bit easier if you see them over there. But it was great talking with all of you, and thank you, Mantu, for hosting.
Absolutely. I love hosting for Diana. I requested well before she even started this. So I was like, I want to be in the next one. But if you guys want to find me, I am JM_Steger, STEGER on Twitter. And I have a link tree on there. So all of my stuff is there. Or you can just go to fantasyandcoffee.com. That's me. And we can all continue this conversation in the Discord. And if you guys have the extra money supporting us by buying merch, which I happen to just have designed, is available. You can ask. The link is actually in the chat. And thank you guys again so much for being here. It was so much fun. Thank you.